Very big welcome to you all to the Buddhist Society's talk tonight. And it's our special guest, Robina Courtin, who is going to be talking to us about wisdom and compassion. Basically, a bird needs two wings. With only one wing, it just flies around in circles.
There you go.
So it needs two of them.
Yes.
Robina is speaking to us from the United States, I think.
Yes.
From New Mexico, did you say, Robina?
Indeed, Santa Fe.
All the way from Santa Fe, how lovely. Yeah. And I'm going to make a little introduction now. For those of you who don't know Robina, she has an enviable life. She's done practically everything. She was raised as a Roman Catholic. And when she was young, she was interested in becoming a Carmelite nun. She trained as a classical singer. And then living in London during the 1960s, she became a feminist activist. And worked up,
a hippie and a communist first.
You're communist first. Communist, feminist, a hippie, communist, feminist activist.
Yeah, that's exactly. And supporters of Black Power as well. I got that in also. Yes.
Okay. So you ticked all the boxes during the 60s. All the boxes.
Yes.
But also on behalf of prisoners' rights in the early 70s. And in 72, you moved to Melbourne and you studied martial arts while living in New York City. Yes. And then you went back again to Melbourne and you took a course by Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa in Queensland.
Right.
And that started you off presumably on the path to the Dharma.
That's it.
And in 78, Robina ordained in the Tushita Meditation Center in Dharamsala in Uttar Pradesh, I think it is, or Himachal Pradesh. She was editorial director of Wisdom Publications until 1987 and editor of Mandala until 2000. And she left Mandala to teach and develop Liberation Prison Project. Robina Courtin's work has been featured in 2 documentary films. So look these up if you want to know more about Robina. Christine Lundberg's book, On the Road Home, made in 1998, and Amiel Curtin Wilson's Chasing Buddha in 2000. And Vicky McKenzie also wrote a book, Why Buddhism? And her nephew's film, Chasing Buddha, documents Robina's life and her work with death row inmates in the Kentucky State Penitentiary. And in 2000, the film was nominated for Best Direction in Documentary Film by the Australian Film Institute. In 2001, Robina created Chasing Buddha Pilgrimage, which led pilgrimages to Buddhist holy sites in India, Nepal, and Tibet to raise money for the Liberation Prison Project, an association engaged for Tibetan cause. I think it's a great CV. It's just fantastic. I don't know how you managed to get it all in. My goodness, and here you are.
I'm not dead yet, so we'll see what happens.
And here you are to talk about wisdom and compassion.
Okay.
Okay, well, very, very, very big welcome. And we're going to last 90 minutes, is that right? And then there's going to be plenty of time for questions. Yeah. There are places for questions where you can write in at the bottom. And, enjoy. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much. So happy to be here. I wish I were in London, because as we just mentioned, sort of my stamping ground. That's why I kind of grew up in London, found out who I was, It's very interesting. And spent many years in England as well as a Buddhist. And my daddy's a Londoner, so there you go. Okay, I'm going to start with a little prayer. I like to do that. And the prayer just has 2 aspects to it. The first part is kind of, for those of us already identify with being a Buddhist, it kind of reiterates our reliance on the Buddha and his teachings. And the second 2 lines, they're just really stating, the Tibetans would call it stating your motivation. We probably say state your purpose. What's your goal? Why are we here together for this 90 minutes? Well, it's to listen to Buddha's view about the universe. And even though I'm chatting away, I'm going to be listening as well, definitely, processing it. So why are we listening? Well, to get tools from it as advice, And the tools really are help us develop these 2 wings. Wisdom wing, which is all the nuts and bolts of the Buddhist teachings of what we use to turn ourselves into this marvelous person so that we can be of benefit to others, which is the compassion wing, That's the meaning of the little prayer. We mentioned that I was a singer. My mother taught me as a singer, but I used to be a soprano. I'm more like a bass baritone now. So we'll see what happens. Sangye charang soke chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyabsu chi dagi chonyen gi personam ki drola penche sangye dropa shok Sangye charang soke chognam la, jangcho baru dagni kyab suchi. Dagi chönyen gi personam ki, drola penchir sangye drupa shog. Sangye charang soke chognam la, jangcho baru dagni kyab suchi. Dagi chönyen gi personam ki, drola penchir sangye drupa shog. Okay. Well, I think these two wings is such a good analogy, you know. I mean, they use it in the Mahayana, but actually it's for any one of us. And it's, you know, it's a really clear way of presenting how we kind of put the teachings into our lives. So, you know, the wisdom wing is really all the nuts and bolts of Buddha's teachings that we know so well. You know, there is the Four Noble Truths right there for a start. The essence of that is the Four Noble Truths. And of course, who is Buddha talking to there? You know, not to our next door neighbor, not to our wife, not to our husband. I wish they were here, we say, when we hear the teachings. He's talking to us. So that's the stuff we put into practice. We have to know our own suffering. Now, that's a big problem already because, you know, we know that Buddha's view of suffering is way more nuanced and goes to much subtler degrees than we would ever imagine. So it's really quite powerful if we want the big picture in Buddhism, especially to, you know, to get an understanding of what suffering is. And we'll go into this. It's really powerful because knowing what suffering is, which we learn about ourselves first, that's the basis for our ability to have compassion. I mean, what else is compassion? Compassion is you see other people suffering and you have empathy. You wish they didn't and you want to help. So we clearly have to be on the same page when it comes to Buddha's view of what suffering is. And this is the tricky bit. So then we have to know the causes of suffering, because if you first identify a problem, you have to first identify a problem, but you can never solve it, can you, until you know the cause. So that's the second of these four. The third is, guess what, folks? You can get rid of suffering and its causes, which is kind of quite a revolutionary concept. I mean, look at us trying how hard in the West, trying to find the meaning of life, using our scientific methods of what suffering is and how to get rid of it. Buddha's been telling us very quietly, he's got the method already down for 2,500 years. And the third one, the fourth one is how to do it, the method. So it's really profound, you know, and this is, for us, this is essentially the wisdom wing. So, of course, the Tibetans have a nice way of packaging Buddha's teachings, you know. And there's one coming from Tsongkhapa, our 14th century lineage Lama of the tradition that I'm part of, but there are variations of it in all the Tibetan teachings. And it's this really practical kind of presentation, a variation of the Four Noble Truths, but a way of presenting. But the crucial piece is presenting in an orderly way. So any body of knowledge that you're trying to internalize, the way you present it, the way you learn it, the way you internalize it is according to levels, isn't it? You know, so the Tibetans, for example, Tsongkhapa talks about the first stages of the first part of the wisdom wing. He would refer to it, or as Lama Zopa puts it, very respectfully honoring the lineage. It's the teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the least capability. Well, you know what? I'd rather say junior school. The second we hear that, we get it. I mean, you know, it's a very abstract idea. They call it the teachings of the lowest capability, the lowest scope. Junior school is good enough. Then you've got high school, then you've got university and postgraduate, if you like. So here we're talking the wisdom wing is the junior school and high school. So this is the work we do on ourselves, the nuts and bolts of it. This is the fundamental teachings of Buddha. What is suffering? What are its causes? How to get rid of it? And then doing, you know, that you can get rid of it and then doing the job. Now the point is here, if we take, this is the wisdom wing, and if we can accomplish that even to some degree, developing renunciation of suffering and its causes, not to mention finally achieving our own liberation altogether, but if we're practicing that level, we are the direct beneficiaries. The whole point of those teachings, which is essentially Buddha's teachings about ethics, which is called the law of karma, and let's talk about this, and then that's like junior school. The fundamentals are control your body, control your speech, don't harm others. That's the first level of practice. That's the junior school level. That's abiding by the laws of karma. And this is a very specific approach in Buddhism. So let's look at that one. And then there's high school, when having harnessed to some degree our body and speech, which is our behavior, which is what impacts upon everybody else, which is what does the harm to others. You know, so Buddha exhorts us to try and control our body and speech, at least don't harm others. And he's got a little checklist of 10 don'ts, good advice. But then we've got the next level, which is the high school part, and that's more advanced. Now, because you've harnessed your crazy body and speech to some degree, we now have the luxury to start doing the actual job of being a Buddhist. Lama Yeshe, my teacher, he says, be your own therapist. I mean, it's a really good way to put it. And it's kind of cliched, but it's profoundly true. And this is based upon Buddha's amazing model of the mind, you know. I mean, I mentioned when I was there in London a few months ago, came to the centre. But this, we often forget this in the West. We love Mr. Buddha and we forget about his history, the background. Well, these genius Indians before him, you know. I always quote His Holiness the Dalai Lama saying, was these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago who are the ones who began the investigation into the nature of self. And that, I mean, and where did they look? They didn't look in the brain like we do now. They looked internally in the actual cognitive process itself, which is what Buddha refers to as our mind or our consciousness, which for the Buddha, by definition, is not our brain. He doesn't argue with the brain. That's not his expertise. His expertise is the internal workings of the mind. And so the Buddhist model of the mind was already mapped well before him by these ingenious Indians before him, having discovered it within their own internal mind, using that amazing technique that we all know about so well called shamatha. You know, they created that. So this is the wisdom wing. And if you're completing all this, you achieve your own liberation. You're out of here, baby. You don't come back. But as we know on the Mahayana, you can go further onto the university level and you can do the Bodhisattva path, you know. But even with that, even with not thinking of the Bodhisattva path, we can understand the idea of wisdom and compassion. So it's fairly evident if we do want to help others, and many people, I think, especially in the West, really have a connection with Buddhism because of the teachings on compassion. This is the point. But as His Holiness says, compassion is the point, but it's not enough. You've got to have wisdom. So the wisdom wing is what makes us reasonable people. So let's look at the frame. Let's look at that, you know. But before we even do that, let's remind ourselves of why, even at the very first stages of practice, we'd use Buddha's advice. Why would we decide to, you know, to do what Buddha exhorts us to not do? Don't kill, don't lie, don't steal, don't jump on the wrong partner, don't this, don't that. Why is that? This is a really crucial one to remember. I mean, we all know as Buddhists, or even if we know about Buddhism, we know that he's not a creator. He doesn't assert such a thing. He has philosophical discussions that would assert that that's a misconception. He's not being rude. Even if you have faith in a creator, don't be insulted by this. It's a fundamental point that's important in Buddhism. And once we get this clear, it informs the way we listen to Buddha's teachings, and it informs, you know, therefore our approach to practice. And it's a massive one, because I think we're brought up certainly in our modern culture, Western culture, brought up in either as Jews or maybe Muslims, perhaps, but mostly maybe many of us are Christians. And that, of course, asserts there is a being called a superior being, called God who is a creator. That's his main function. He is the source of the universe. He's the source of the laws. And simply speaking, he's a punisher and a rewarder. I mean, not being fundamentalist about it, but that very much is our view of morality, isn't it? It's some information that someone puts on top of you that you should obey. And if you don't choose to, then you feel all suppressed and miserable. But if you choose to, well, marvelous. You're happy that God is the boss. You will do his wishes. And then, you know, you'll be oneness with God when you die. And I'm not being sarcastic. It's a perfect way to live your life. So we assume that morality, laws of ethics, are things that God has said we should not do, and that therefore are things we should do. So I always quote this, and I quote my Jesuit priest friend when I asked him, by definition, what is a sin? You know, a negative action, Buddhists might say. And he said, by definition, it's doing what God said not to do. In other words, killing, he said, is wrong because it's a natural law. But the main component, and I think this is my main point, is it's wrong because God said. This is a very powerful point philosophically. And I think that's our view. And we bring that view into Buddhism if we've come from being Christians. But it's a mistake. It's wrong. It's the wrong view. And this is why we're often so neurotic and feel we're going to be punished and how bad, and we think about karma, we think of it as like the worst punishment possible, and someone's up there running the show punishing. Well, in Buddhism, there is no creator, there is no punisher, and there is no rewarder. It's easy to say, but we really got to look into the implication of this experientially. Basically, the law of karma, and I want to go into it roughly, you know, as His Holiness says, it's like self-creation. It's a wonderful way to put it. Because Buddha would assert we're not the handiwork of a creator. We are absolutely not the handiwork of mummy and daddy. A surprise to us. Even if we're Buddhists, we still think mummy and daddy gave us love and compassion and hate and being good at music or football. No, Buddha says. We bring our own stuff with us. This is something fundamental in Buddhist view of the world. Even if you're not interested in studying the big picture, this still is the Buddhist view. It's in the literature, you know, it's vast. that consciousness or mind, and these words are synonymous, are not physical. They're not the handiwork of another being. They're not the product of someone else. They're not a function of the brain. They're not physical. Consciousness goes back and back and back, and it will go forward, forward, forward. This is just the way the world is for the Buddha. And this is the crucial point, where did Buddha get this information from? Not from on high. He is not a creator. It was not revealed to him. He observed it with his own mind. This is the point. So Buddha, in this sense, is exactly the same as a scientific person, exactly the same as Einstein. This is not a joke, it's not sarcastic, it's true. But because we have such assumptions about what can be proved and what can't, we have an assumption in the materialist world that you can't prove that mind is not physical. You can't prove reincarnation. Well, that's clearly absurd. I mean, Buddha did. He's a person who's done it. He's a person who didn't, he's not just making it up. It's not revelation. He's not speculating. He observed this to be true. This is exactly the Buddhist approach. So we mightn't like what he says, and we might never get to prove what he says, but this is what he says, it's there. So basically Buddha's saying, hey guys, this is what I found to be so, and this is the entire Buddhist path. This is what I found you can all accomplish. I've done the work. Here's my methodology. It's over to you. That's it. That's the Buddhist approach. I always tell the story of what New Zealand a few years ago. Excuse me, I have to have a drink. It was actually a scientist. It was very curious. It was a scientist. And this is the first time I've ever had this question. It's very fascinating. I noticed we all ask the same questions. He said, who revealed the teachings to the Buddha? Which is a perfect question if you think of religion being a creator-based religion. And that's our default assumption, isn't it? Well, he was very shocked when I said, would you ask Einstein who revealed relativity to him, We think that's a joke, but it's not. It's exactly the same. But what Buddhism is, like Einstein, is that's his findings. Einstein he did not have it was not revelation. He didn't have a dream or a vision. He's not making it up. We'd be very insulted if he were. He's not speculating. He's done his homework. He presents his findings, and then he's relaxed. He does not ask us to believe it. He says, over to you if you want to prove it to be the same for yourself. Buddha's exactly the same. Exactly the same. But the difference, obviously, is in content. So the Buddha's view is this is how he's found what he's found to be true. Consciousness is not physical. It goes back and back and back, and it'll continue. Suffering and its causes can be removed from the mind utterly, and that's a pretty kind of revolutionary concept, philosophically and psychologically, if we think about it seriously. It's pretty stunning. That's what Buddha's found to be so. And we've all got this potential. Every being has this potential, So here's what I did to achieve this, and if you'd like to get rid of suffering and get happiness, over to you, baby. That's really the Buddha's approach. We have to remember that. We don't have to like him. We don't have to believe him. In fact, he insists we don't believe him. That's just intellectual laziness. But because we're so addicted to believing you can't prove past and future kind of lives, we're just addicted to that because that's the materialist view. But this is where we have to understand then, and this is where we learn this on the wisdom wing, Buddha's view of what the mind is and what its function is radically different. I mean, so radically different, It is not physical. It is not the handiwork of anybody else, mummy, daddy, or creator. It goes back and back and continues on and on. It's its own entity. It's got far more subtle levels of cognition, and this is the crucial point. The Hindus discovered this before the Buddha. With this shamatha, they access these subtler levels of their own mind, and still today we know there are people looking like you and me up in the mountains, metaphorically or actually, accomplishing this shamatha. It's not a dead technique, it's a living extant technique, and it's been around well before the Buddha. Buddha happily took it with him when he diverged in his own direction. It's right there. It's a psychological skill. Don't forget that, We have all these lovely words called mindfulness, and there are about 29 varieties of it. We've practiced its own religion now. But this is the Buddha's view. This is coming way back to these Indians. And for the Buddha, in order to do the job of achieving your own potential, ridding the mind of all the rubbish, ridding the mind of all the causes and its suffering and its causes, we need to access this subtle level. We need to have shamatha, this life or at some point, in order to do the work of unpacking and unraveling the nonsense in the mind that the Buddha says is the source of our suffering. To find reality, to see reality, to find truth and cut the nonsense and achieve our liberation, This is the job we have to do, and it's got nothing to do with merely believing. This is another point that's really crucial. We're, again, addicted to this view that you can't prove Christianity or Islam because it's from God, it's from on high. And in fact, if you said you could prove it, that's beyond arrogant. That's like saying you can become God. So you must never do that. But that's not the Buddha's view. To prove, in the Buddhist view, you see, to prove what he's saying is true means to experience the truth of it, not to know it intellectually. That's the whole point. So it demands engagement. So merely believing something, equally, that scientist, you know, he would never say, oh, I believe in mathematics, I believe in botany. We would never say that. We'd be laughed at. But we all like to say, oh, I believe in karma, I believe in reincarnation. It's intellectual laziness. It's either true or it's not. And the Buddha's given us methods that he followed, that he found can be proven to be so. It's up to us to discover whether the Buddha's right. As His Holiness said, often to us in the West. You know, if you're practicing Buddhism sincerely, and at my words now, using his methodology step by step, and as you go, you tick the boxes, don't you? Like you learn anything, you tick the boxes. But at some point, if you can actually get to the point where you can prove the Buddha's wrong, of course you must reject him. And that's the fruit of practice. So believing in something, belief is the starting point. When you first learned 1 + 1 is 2, you had to believe your teacher. You'd be in trouble otherwise, but you've got to prove it. Don't just leave it at the level of belief. You know, you can believe in mathematics very comfortably because enough people know it, you can get away with it. But if you go to the market and your mother says, buy me 5 oranges, you can't do it because you don't know mathematics. This is a very major point, you know. That's why I never use the word I believe in all this stuff. I say it's my working hypothesis, which is what a decent scientist would do. You know, working with it, not just believing in it. It's so crucial. You make it your own experience, you know. That's the Buddhist approach. So, okay, what does he say? On this wisdom wing, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to put myself together. So what's the start? The starting point is being like an ordinary quote-unquote samsaric person. What would I be like? Using Buddha's view, you know, I'd be very disconnected. I could be very disconnected from myself and from the rest of the world. I'd have lots of low self-esteem, perhaps, or lots of depression. I'd be angry. I'd be depressed. I'd be jealous. I'm convinced that my boyfriend has to make me happy. I'd be convinced that people out there cause me suffering. I believe my mother made me. I believe my mind's the brain. I'm not being rude here, but these are the views we just bring on board, and then we have this, and the suffering of this is, and the experience as a result of these viewpoints. Forget the brain one, even that, but never mind that. But the other one, just being disconnected, a very solid sense of a concrete me that I never question, that whose main voice is attachment, and then the voice that rises when attachment doesn't get what it wants, which is anger. This is how we live our lives. There are variations of these neuroses, variations of these afflictions, as Buddhism politely translates the word klesha, and indeed the Tibetan equivalent, you know. These deluded states of mind, these neurotic states of mind, these unhappy states of mind, these disturbing states of mind. Now the point is we know these. We all know anger, jealousy, depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, arrogance. We know them in ourselves and we can see them in other people. But the crucial point is this. You know, the word Buddha is interesting, the etymology of it, and the Tibetan equivalent as well, Sangye. The first syllable implies the utter eradication from our mind of all this stuff. Now that's nirvana. That's liberation. That's what you've done. When you've achieved the wisdom wing, when you've achieved that, that's your liberation from suffering and its causes. You have cut the root of all misconceptions, this ego grasping. Therefore, you have cut completely attachment and fears and low self-esteem and all the other nonsense. Please hear these words very clearly. They are no longer in your mind. Now that's what's radical about Buddhist psychology. But it's hard for us to hear it in our materialist views, because we give equal status, don't we, to those qualities as well as to the next set of qualities that Buddha says we've got, and the second syllable, da or ge, implies we can develop those to perfection. Love, compassion, wisdom, kindness. We know these words intimately, but this is profound for the Buddha. He has found from his own experience that we can rid the mind of all the rubbish. And why should we? Because guess what, folks? He says, that's why you're suffering, baby. So that's suffering and its causes, speaking simply, you know. And he adds to that the one of karma. It's the way the mind works. As far as the Buddha is concerned, the natural law that runs the universe, or if you like, the law within which minds and lives of all beings, you know, runs. It's the law of karma. It's, as His Holiness says, like self-creation. And it's not a joke. And it's not something made up by the hippies in the 1960s, you know, okay? It's an amazing teaching coming before these Hindus which Buddha then had, and they've codified in the Buddhist teachings, and that's what you study in depth, certainly in the Tibetan Buddhist monastic university system, you know, in depth, and indeed anywhere in Buddhist countries if you study the philosophy and the theories. You learn this. It's the view. It's Buddha's view. How reality is. That consciousness is not physical. It did not begin in our mother's womb. It's not the handiwork of a creator. It goes back and back. It's got its own continuity. And the simple principle of this natural law, a natural law, remember, not Buddha's law. He didn't make it up. It's a joke. Is that every millisecond of what we think and do and say programs us. He would have liked that term. Sows seeds in our mind that will produce naturally future fruits, which happen to be our experiences in the future. So quite literally, but it takes a real while to really get this feeling, to get a sense of this, and therefore get the ownership of our qualities, of our characteristics, of our actions, that we do create ourselves moment by moment. So what's interesting about this, I think, is in our culture, we're geniuses, intellectual, technologically, artistically, we're incredible. And so if you're sitting there playing the piano beautifully, and I'll go, oh, wow, I'm amazed, Robina, you're playing such incredible piano. Why? You'll give me an idiot look. What are you talking about? I've been practicing for 10 years. What do you think? So you know very well you created that piano player by working hard, by working with your mind, learning classical music theory, and then practicing and practicing and practicing. So we know we create the gardener, the carpenter, the tennis player, but we do not think we create the person. It's very fascinating, meaning our emotions. We have a whole other set of very weird rules. We think our mother and father made us. We think they gave us anger and love and depression, so therefore they're the blame. And then we think everybody in our lives since then, the events and the people, they're the cause of my suffering, and they're the cause of my happiness, and they're the cause of the person I become. Buddha says, excuse me, they play a role, baby, like your music teacher does and like Bach does, but they are not the main cause of you. You are the main cause of you. It's not a difficult concept, but it's the one we resist mightily. Because one of the tragic consequences of this kind of disconnected sense of self that Buddha says we have now, because of all these delusions, we really do feel like we're hopeless, like a victim, like I didn't ask to get born, like it's not my fault. And as Zopa says, which sounds so shocking to us, the vast majority of all humans on this planet have absolutely no idea that what goes on in their mind plays any role at all in their lives. Now hear that. That's very shocking to even believe it's true. But check ourselves, check the world, because we are obsessed with the external world being the main cause of my happiness and the main cause of my suffering. We have a view that thinks I can think what I like, meaning it doesn't matter, meaning we don't count what thing. Whereas the Buddha's view is the exact opposite. The meaning of the word karma is actually action, but the real meaning of that is mental action, thought, volition. If you want a boss in here, Buddha says there's no little mini me running the show in here, which is what we think. If you want the boss is intention, and it's there every millisecond in our mind. That's volition. We don't know it's running our mind because we come into this life programmed, but that's the boss, intention, mental action. That starts the ball rolling, you know. So the Buddha's view is everything that goes on in our mind is absolutely vitally important, because every thought produces the person I become. Every thought then expresses itself through the medium of its servants, which is my body and my speech. Look at the world. So the very first level of practice is to control the servants of your mind. Control your body. Don't kill, please. Don't lie. Don't jump on the wrong partner. Don't take the ungiven, as the Tibetans put it. And 3 or 4 of the speech, you know, which is humans, isn't it? Not so much animals. And this is the crucial point now. Jesus also tells us not to kill, not to steal, not to jump on the wrong partner. So we know why, because God said, perfect reasoning, do God's will, please, if that's what you think. Not for the Buddha. Buddha is not exhorting us to not kill because he says so. There's no equivalent in Buddhism. That's called ignorance. That's kind of radical. It's like a whatever. Won't say it. I'll get too extreme sometimes. So why then, you should ask Buddha, why should I stop killing, please? And he will say, well, you know, his definition of a negative action isn't something that he said not to do, which is the Christian one, but it's an action. This at first level is an action that'll harm another. Well, killing's pretty reasonable, rape's pretty reasonable, bad-mouthing your next-door neighbour's pretty reasonable, they harm others. But the crucial point at the first level of practice in junior school, this is really important, and we miss this one completely in our culture. The main reason at the first stages of practice where Buddha exhorts us not to kill, steal, lie, is not yet because it harms others. That's what defines it. But guess what Buddha says? It will harm you. This is hard for us to see. This is hard for us to think. The Buddha's saying every second I lie, steal, kill, every second I'm generous and loving and compassionate. That's the process of producing the person I become and my future experiences. It's all laid out in great depth, the consequences of all these actions. And again, there's no punisher, there's no rewarder, which is how we think of it. Someone's going to punish me, I'm a bad person. We put that nonsense onto these meanings. They're not there. It's a very clean, clear presentation. And the implication of this view of karma is incredible accountability. If we have the normal view beginning before we start becoming conscious, let's say we use Buddha's teachings, is we're self-piteous, not fair, poor me, I didn't ask to get born, it's my husband's fault, it's the world's fault, it's this fault. I mean, not being horrible about us, we all recognize this, because we really believe we're this innocent victim who got plonked on this earth, you know? Not true. We produced ourselves, Buddha says, as absurd and shocking as it sounds. So when we start to live according to this law of karma, and the thing is, if you don't learn it, how can you live according to it? You can't. If you don't learn botany, how can you have a garden? If you don't know the basic principles of karma, how can you use it in your daily life? That's why most of us don't study Buddhism, but we need to if we want to be a serious Buddhist. Believing in it is not enough. Then the whole idea is that you learn to, as soon as you start to do this, you become less neurotic, you become more accountable, we take more responsibility, we get less attached, less angry, less blaming, less guilty. That's a fact if we use it properly, you know. This is the first level, not even being my own therapist yet. I'm just controlling my body and speech, you know, which is already a profound level of practice. And the main beneficiary at this level of practice is yourself. But that's where we feel ashamed. That's where we think, oh, well, I'm not really suffering. We look at the world now, look at all the whatever's going on politically, look at it, you know. If you've still got a house and a job, you know, maybe you're experiencing white privilege like everyone talks about, that's always been around the universe, that's we know it now, then we can realize we're very fortunate. Okay, we created the cause for this. So you don't just feel lucky. You realize it's the fruit of your past actions that would bliss you out every day. So then, of course, because you want more happiness in the future, you want to have a good life, you want to have nice friends and money in the bank and have a job and good things happen. You don't want bad things to happen. You don't want to get COVID-19. You don't want to die. You don't want to be abused racially. You don't want that suffering, so you don't cause it. It demands accountability. But, of course, it's hard because we hear it as victim, punishment, blame, reward. We've got lots of baggage around these ideas. So for a while, it takes us, coming from in our culture, to unpack all that and try and hear the essence of what Buddha's saying. And if we can hear it properly, it brings compassion for ourselves. It brings compassion for ourselves. Therefore, who would want to harm themselves? Then that's the basis of having compassion for others. It's fundamental. The wisdom wing has to come first, you know. So then you get to the next level, and now you have to do the real work. Start unpacking your mind, looking and identifying, distinguishing between, in this soup of emotion of ours, between the neurotic states of mind and the valid ones. And that's a really important point in Buddhist psychology. We don't talk about invalid and valid states of mind in modern psychology. It sounds heavy, but this is exactly what Buddha is saying. And we have to learn to identify these unhappy states of mind. This is a mason. This is a minefield, you know, because... How are we going time? Okay, we're fine. So because Buddha's view is very specific, when we go to our therapist, and there's nothing wrong, we have marvelous therapists in our culture, but because it's so rooted, our views are so rooted in the materialist view, the philosophical materialist view of the brain, DNA, genes, mummy, daddy, etc., etc., a lot of our work a lot of our psychological work is looking into the past and trying to unpack it and looking for a needle in a haystack that is the cause of why I'm depressed, why I'm jealous, why I'm angry, why I choose crummy boyfriends, you know. But the Buddhist approach, which has nothing to do with that, nothing to do with it. Buddha's view is very profound, very direct. The Buddhist approach, as the Lama puts it, Lama Yeshe, being your own therapist, you learn the Buddhist model, you identify these different states of mind, and the negative or neurotic ones have very specific characteristics. They're I-based, they're fear-based, they're self-centered, they are deeply suffering, they harm us terribly, and they're the source of why we harm others. So like I said, with karma, looking into the mind like this starts to bring compassion for yourself, not self-hate, which is how we hear it. Oh, I'm a bad person. No. We're trying to identify what causes me pain. We're not discussing compassion yet. That comes later. We're trying to see what the hell is the cause of my pain, my suffering. Why do bad things happen to me? And because I'm sick of it. Like, Buddha calls this renunciation, you know. It's not something forbidding. It's giving up suffering and its causes. I'm the beneficiary. So we go deeper now into the mind and identify the characteristics of these neurotic states of mind. Now, we might know that Buddha talks about 84,000 distinctly neurotic, a whole map of the mind, 84,000 neurotic states of mind. But luckily for us, they all subsume to 3. Ignorance, attachment, and anger. We all know the 3 poisons, the 3 toxic emotions. But the Buddha's view of these is very specific, you know. We don't use these words in modern psychology. You don't go to your therapist and say, oh, I had so much attachment today. She'll tell you to shut up and go home and wait till you want to kill somebody, you know. And this is a big problem for us in our culture, I'd say. Because we're so addicted to the physical. Because we're so addicted, and I'm not being critical about neuroscience, they're genius, amazing peoples, and His Holiness has these wonderful communications within the last 30, 40 years, which is bringing all these views, you know, into the open, and people are discussing and looking at similarities and finding wonderful things. It's fantastic. But because we're so oriented towards the physical, so we're so fixated on the physical and the external, that's where we look most of the time. So this is the problem here, because we're fixated also on our physical body as being the me. I only notice I'm having a problem in my mind when it's vomiting out my mouth and I want to kill my boyfriend, or I can't get out of bed one morning because I'm inert with depression. So we only notice what's happening in our mind when the body tells us, and it's way too late. That's like Vesuvius exploding. In other words, the commonest thing we say is, oh, I was screaming at my boyfriend, I was so angry, what will I do? Well, that's like asking, you're 100 miles an hour on the motorway and you just realize your wheels are falling off. You've never noticed before you had a problem. That's how we are with our emotions. And this is a major, major point. Buddha gives us these brilliant skills. I'm not just talking about mindfulness meditation like some magic. The skill of Buddha's is this ability, yes, indeed, using some kind of focusing meditation that gives us the ability to start to become conscious of what the hell is going on inside between our ears, listening to these thousands of thoughts, all chatting away, that we normally never pay attention to until either they're vomiting out the mouth or you can't move because you're totally depressed. In other words, we've got to go beyond the physical. We've got to listen to our thoughts, and that's not some cosmic thing. We know from the time we wake up until the time we go to sleep, the thoughts are never stopping. But we don't pay attention until they're shouting. That's too late. And that's why we have so much incredible stress in our culture, because we wait till it's way too late. I mean, and I always use this analogy, and it seems so silly, but it's profound. We know that there's a thing called mechanics. We do not wait till the wheels fall off before we go to the mechanic. We listen to the wheels wobbling. We notice the problems and we use preventative. But we don't use preventative with our mind. We wait till we're nearly crazy. And our whole medical, psychological system is based on that, you know. In other words, we all think we're normal until you're going crazy. Well, Buddha happens to say we're all mentally ill, and I'm not being sarcastic. We've all got attachment and fears and anger and jealousy and depression, and he's given us methods to identify them way down more subtle, where we can handle them and reconfigure those conceptual stories, because they're all conceptual stories. They're all viewpoints deep in our bones. We got programmed with as we came into this life with them. We've got to go deeper down in, and it's not cosmic. It's not kind of mystical. It's very practical psychology to begin to hear the thoughts, the conceptual stories, the scripts inside our mind well before they reach the level of emotion. That's the skill. That's the skill we have to learn. That's the day-to-day skill of being a Buddhist, you know. Noticing what the hell you're thinking, taking responsibility for your anger, your fears, your jealousy, depression, not looking out there for the thing that triggered it. There's always something that triggers it. That's not your business. Your business is the anger itself. And that's a hard one. Why, normal person, why are you angry? I'll give you a detailed description of my ugly boyfriend. You won't complain. You'll understand it. I asked Buddha, why am I angry, Buddha? You say, Robina, darling, you must have been angry before. You've got a habit. I'll say, yeah, I know that, but why? This why question is huge. He'll keep repeating the same answer, because you must have a tendency to be angry from the before, Robina. But why was I angry yesterday, Buddha? Because you must have been angry before. And you go right back to your first second of conception, and you came programmed with that, guess what? From being angry before. So basically one way karma works, it's hardly complicated. We come into this life programmed with our own tendencies. They did not come from mummy. They did not come from daddy. They might share them, no problem. but they're mine, baby. So knowing this, and who cares whether the person punches me in the nose or a person kisses me? They're the catalysts, no problem. But my business is not them. My business is my response. That's my mind. That's the job of being a Buddhist. And it's profound. It's huge, you know, because we want to point to the outside. We'd rather do that. This is where, for me, working with people in prison has been such a profound experience. Just now, I'm finishing editing a book by Lama Zopa, my teacher. You know, I ran for many years Liberation Prison Project. I don't run it anymore, but I still work with people in prison. And for me, because American prisons, I mean, prisons everywhere are horrible, but Americans are very good at horrible prisons, with respect. I mean, the numbers there are mind-boggling. They've got far more people per head of population than any country on the planet of people in prison, and it's getting worse. They've got 5% of the population, but 25% of the prison population. In other words, a quarter of all humans on the planet who live in a prison live in United States prisons. So it's just pretty intense. So working with people in prisons, 99.99% are poor. I promise you I've never met a rich person on death row. I promise. I've very rarely met any rich people in prison, period. Let's say the psychopaths. I think probably 20,000 prisoners over the years who wrote to us, helped in some way we helped. And I'd say 99% are working class, poor, no money, no funds, no resources. It's like a nightmare, you know. And I think everywhere it's the same. Like there's always the working class and the poor people who get chucked into prison, isn't it, you know? Anyway, so it's very intense. But the intense part for me was because the sentencing in America is so outrageous. Not to mention death row, but 30-year sentences for blinking at someone, you know, because the laws are so intense and it's so punitive, you know. So there's so many young people chucked into this, young black men and Latino men with no money, no resources, in 30-year sentences for like nothing. Nothing. Good human beings, I promise you. I'm not trying to say they're all saints. But for me, it was so profound working with people in prison because they can't change anything. Their backs are against the wall. You can do nothing. You can do nothing. You have no power over anything. You live in this garbage dump. You're treated like an animal. The noise is unbearable. The resources are just, there's no resources. There's no education in many of the prisons, I tell you. So it's really kind of intense. And our usual view, you know, in our own lives, our usual response is either anger or despair. You know, that's it. So, you know, so then we just started this project because the person wrote to us first in 96 or something. I sent a letter. He wrote a letter. I sent a book, and it grew from there, you know. So then just this book I'm finishing is people would write to Lama Zopa. They'd hear about him and write a letter, and he'd write these intensely long letters giving incredible practice advice, but always from the most radical level of practice. In Tibetan, they call it lojong. And it's the more advanced level of the compassion wing where you're really qualified, having done the wisdom wing, having understood your own self, having understood your own mind, taking responsibility, abiding by the laws of karma, stopping being a victim, being courageous and brave. And this level of practice called lojong, or also called transforming problems, where you really are qualified when the worst scenarios are there, you're able to utilize those to reinterpret them to your advantage. And that's intense. That means seeing your prisoners good. It means thanking the people who tortured you almost, you know, like this radical approach. They've got to be qualified to do it. And there's a woman I know, I always quote her. I didn't meet her through the prison project, but I know her now. I read about her. Yeah, a nice white hippie lady back in Florida in the 70s with a husband and 3 kids, hitching along. 2 guys picked them up. The police stopped them. And the 2 guys killed the police and blamed the hippies. And so she's written her memoir and whatever, but she's well known. So her name's Sunny. And this amazing woman, she was not a Buddhist, but there she was in a cell on her own. Her husband got executed. She even went to the execution and his head burst into flames. I mean, can you imagine? She lost her children. Her parents died. Just this nightmarish hell of a life for 17 years. And she said, she's not a Buddhist, she did yoga and things, but she had this incredible emotional intelligence, which is why I think it needs this approach. She said, I finally realized I couldn't change anything, but they couldn't take my mind from me. So I decided, I'm not a prisoner, I'm a monk. I'm not in a cell, I'm in a cave. Now, I mean, we love to read about this. It's always so moving, but think of it in your daily life. Think of it. Think of the problems we have. And this level of practice is pretty profound. It's on the compassion wing. It's way more profound than controlling your body and speech and being cautious, which is the first level. This is a really powerful level of practice. And it also implies emptiness, where you're able to reinterpret something that's not set in stone, that we can learn to reinterpret our experiences. We can reinterpret them to our own advantage. And that's the essence, really, of what Buddha's saying. Finally, with the wisdom teachings, that nothing has an intrinsic nature and that we can learn to reinterpret. So this woman, I mean, I've met many former prisoners coming out of outrageous situations, really difficult suffering, what we call in the West lots of PTSD, all those kind of things, really mentally suffering, kind of emotionally thwarted, emotionally kind of broken, you know. But this woman, you meet her now, she's my age, 70s. She's like a little old lady. You would never know in a million years that she'd been tortured and miserable and suffering for 17 years. You'd never know. Why? Because she worked on her mind. She worked on her mind. She dealt with her reality and changed her interpretation. That's the essence of being a Buddhist, you know. Now, the thing is also, we already know this. We do it to some degree every day. Buddha does not own this stuff. He is not a creator. But I tell you, he's an expert at it. There's no question, you know. So for me, it's been such a moving experience working with people in prison whose lives are garbage. I mean, I'm privileged and blissfully happy in comparison, you know. So it's been a very profound experience and very humbling working with people in prison who are able to deal with their suffering like this and transform their lives and learn to become happy, content human beings in these garbage dumps, you know, including on death row, I tell you. My friend in Kentucky, Mitchell, getting ready for his death date. I'm ready for that electric jolt, Robina. Come to terms with his life, incredibly kind, practices every day, helps all the other guys on death row in Kentucky, about 40 of them. A good human being. And the last meeting, he was discussing how he would be, because when he was sentenced in the 80s, and that the law there is so ridiculous, they've got to electrocute him, because that was the law, even though it's no longer valid. But they've got to put. So he said, how should I be when they electrocute me? He's visualizing this guy coming up this close to him, putting on all the electrics on his body, putting on a sponge, wetting him, putting wires on him. How will I think? Should I think more of him, or should I think more of myself? I said, well, you know, he's got to do his job. Don't get caught up in him. Just have your own practice in your mind, you know. That's what he has to think about, how he's going to die when he gets executed. But he's ready for it. He's amazing, amazing human being. He takes care of all the other guys on death row. He's content with his life. He takes care of people. Amazing. I'm so moved by many of these people whose lives are garbage in our terms, but who really turn themselves around, become special human beings, you know, by using, in this case, by using Buddha's tools. I mean, it's very inspiring to me, you know. What time is it? We've been 1 whole hour. Okay. I think I've said enough of the wisdom wing, more than enough. I think now it's your turn to ask me questions. Okay. We haven't even got to the compassion wing yet. So now it's your turn to ask me questions. Desmond, do we have any on the thingamy?
Yeah, I've got a question for you just immediately. Thank you for a wonderful, inspiring talk, Robina. It was a wonderful talk. No, the first thing I want to do, because I forgot at the beginning, was about the Dalai Lama's album. And maybe we can get that out of the way first, and then we can
Well, yeah, it's interesting because Desmond mentioned this to me yesterday when we talked. But on July 6th, I think this is being launched, this album of His Holiness's words, including some mantras, but also just some just like talk, and being put to music. And so I know about it because I happen to know the woman in New Zealand who requested His Holiness to start this whole thing going, and then her husband, who's a musician, wrote the music, and they kind of tried to sell it around the world to like 40 different record companies, and because of, unfortunately, politics and things, they all put down, were resisted because of His Holiness. But one company in Los Angeles, I can't think of their name, but these two big names in the popular music world have come together and started their own company, and they funded the whole thing. So I think it's called Inner World, and it's coming out on July 6th. But I'm involved because I wrote the words for the booklet, you know, that's all. But it's very moving because it's His Holiness's voice, just saying a few mantras in some cases, but also that she's extracted, Junelle, the woman, extracted like little talks that His Holiness gave about people, about children, about the mother, and they put this music to it. It's very wonderful. It's coming out on July 6th, and I think it's called Inner World. That's what I know, Desmond.
So maybe you work on death row, which must be a very harrowing place to be and spend your time. Could you perhaps tell us something a little bit about that?
I will. I mean, this is what's interesting. You know, we hear these words, and it's got a very powerful pull on us, hasn't it? Death row is a very shocking concept, isn't it? But like everything, once you sort of home in and be there, sitting down, I'm in the chapel, you know, I meet in the chapel, and then sometimes I have private talks with Mitchell, because I've known him for 25 years. and then also with the other prisoners, the ones who come who aren't Buddhists, but I know a whole bunch of them. And because I've got to have the meeting with the death row guys separate from the other guys, so the general population wear brown, and the ones in special security, because they're the pedophiles, and they're in green, and the death row guys are in red. So I meet the red guys, and I know many of them for years, you know. And so we just talk and but when you're in there with a bunch of human beings sitting in chairs, okay, they've got their red jumpsuits, you just see human beings, Desmond. You hear the label, they live on death row, which means they've got a death date. Many of them hasn't come yet for some of them because they're doing their appeals. So when you get really close in on the human level, and that's what I found at every prison I go to, you know, some mostly in America. I mean, a few in England, but not many. Quite a few in Australia. You just meet human beings, Desmond. And I'm not trying to be sarcastic or silly, but it's just human beings sitting there. And I said to you, what's moving, because we really all do have the same problems. I mean, people often say to me, what do you teach when you go to prisoners? I say, not a fraction of difference. I'll be taking exactly these words as I would to them, except for, you know, because of their situation, it's so more poignant. Because they don't, and this is an interesting point, they don't have the luxury that we actually do to change our job or to leave our husband. But often what I point out is to us, we might as well be in prison because we feel so overwhelmed by the external world, so convinced I can't change my life, so convinced I can't change my mind, we might as well be in prison. But the powerful thing with prisoners, they know they can't open that door, so they're forced into their own mind. They're forced to practice. So it's kind of interesting, you know. For me, that's the really humbling part. Therefore, they're really excellent practitioners because they're not pretending, they're not kidding themselves. Maybe one day I'll leave my husband. Maybe one day I'll leave my job, and meanwhile, we don't do anything with our mind or with our lives. But they've got no choice, you know. So that's what I really found most powerful about all of them. Do you understand, Desmond?
Yeah, I think I do. But the appeals sometimes take 20, 30 years, don't they?
Yeah, this is the bizarre irony of that crazy country, and I'm allowed to criticise. Well, actually, I've got a British passport, American and Australian. I've got all, so I'm allowed to criticise all countries because I feel like I'm a citizen of all, okay? I'm just joking. But with America, that's true. This is the incredible irony, you know. This woman, Sonny, who was accused of killing these two policemen, the husband was executed, which means he mustn't have appealed. Because if you don't appeal, you get killed in a month. So this is the incredible irony, all this idea that you've got the right, and they're all poor. So the money that it costs the American taxpayers to keep these thousands of people on death row, every one of whom is poor, is hundreds probably of millions, if not billions of dollars. For 30 years, these guys are in prison. Mitch has been there for 30 years. And because of the, you know, the slowness of the legal system and this respect for the legal system and the right of people to defend themselves, it just goes on and on. So they're almost like, you know, eventually you're going to die. And many times on death row, you die before the execution because you get old, you know. So it's such a bizarre, contradictory system. But people convinced it's helpful, convinced it functions to stop crime, when evidently it doesn't. It's just bizarre, you know. It's right. It's really astonishing. A real contradiction, because 30, 40 years you have your defense lawyers and the taxpayers pay, and every time a new thing comes up in court it takes 5 years for it to be heard. So it's just this extraordinary odd system, you know. It's just, and it doesn't help anybody. It's just very strange. That aspect of it is, for me, Desmond, is very odd. You understand?
This is just another question, which just for me, probably, because I'm curious about it. You know, America is the richest country in the world. It's probably, you know, has most resources of any country in the world.
Yes.
But the many people who are in prison, you know, they've had very adverse childhood experiences.
That's
and
right.
these experiences lead them sort of automatically, almost tunnel them into a prison.
That's it.
You know,
And once
like
even that's right. When you talk about lately all the Black Lives Matter and the young black kids in prison, because the number is outrageously extreme, you know, extreme in comparison with the percentage of the population, is that because of this horrible system of if you can't pay for your, what do you call it when you can't pay for your you put up your money, what do they call, not parole, the other one, bail. If you have no money, many of the people in prison, I've seen the numbers, are locked in there for years because they have no money, and they're not even charged yet. It's really like India. I mean, excuse me, India, but it's like third world in many ways. And these young people completely lost in this system, and even when they are charged, they're just lost in the system because they have no one to talk for them, no money, no support, no family, no friends, no anything. And that's why, for me, even being a few of the prisoners that we've helped get out of prison, not with lawyers or money, we haven't got that, but even just writing a letter supporting somebody is like a gift for some of these guys who are literally lost in this system, who'll never even be seen or heard, even though they should have been out 30 years ago. You know, it's just, the system is just unbearable, absolutely unbearable. I don't know if any of you people can bear heavy duty documentaries. There's one made by that amazing American filmmaker. She made 12 Years as a Slave. She made the Selma movie, I can't think of her name, Ava DuVernay or something. It's on Netflix, it's called The 13th Amendment. It's unbearably painful, showing the shockingness of this system in America. You know, it's just awful. It's painful to see it, the results of it. And it's going to have to be years, you know. And this is the way, you see, for me, so ironic too, Desmond. I mean, you mentioned when you gave a blurb about me, when I was in London, I left home in '67, went to, stopped and started becoming a hippie, and then became a radical lefty, demonstrating, you know, and I remember got arrested on Fleet Street with all the big, remember in 1971, was it, or 70, was the Irish demonstration, you know, the Bloody Sunday. And I was demonstrating, and I got picked up by the police and dragged down Fleet Street and chucked into a bus, all of that, whatever. And then very quickly got involved very strongly supporting George Jackson and the Soledad Brothers back in the late 60s, early 70s, when the big movement of all the Panthers and Angela Davis in America. And I happen to know the reason was because a friend of mine, she's English, she's a literary agent, she was George Jackson's literary agent, so we got this group in London. So it was huge, the whole thing was just huge, you know. I forget why I'm telling you this, I'm raving on. Oh yeah, okay, so all the people I used to write to then, dealing with these prisons, are the same, you know, saying kill the pigs and, you know, up with revolution, all that was where I was at then. And now, here I am 45 years later, 50 years later, dealing with the same prisons, the same scenario, nightmare, but as a Buddhist. And on the face of it, it sounds kind of boring and very kind of pacifist. Or you send one book to one person. You help one person at a time. Then back then it seemed very grand, big gestures. But I worked it out that even 20, 30,000 prisoners that we've actually had contact with since we started 25 years ago. I mean, because I know that the books, we would send mainly books because they have nothing. They have nobody. They have no money. So one book for one prisoner, 100 people could read it. Each of those people would tell someone else. So in the end, I guarantee working one-on-one with human beings, affecting a human being's mind, helping that person change, who helps the next person change, you actually have a more profound effect than you do even with political activity. On the face of it, it doesn't seem it. But I think that was very moving when I thought through that, you know, because you've got to change minds. You can have as many laws as you like, but you can't force white supremacists to like black people. You can't force fundamentalist Christians to like Muslims. You've got to change minds. We have to change minds. Our mind. Start with that. Then every action we do will have benefit, including political. Get out there and be political. The compassion wing is politics, really, but get out there and do it, you know, with courage and want things to change, but not out of rage, not out of blame, not out of hopelessness, but and you're only going to be that way if you don't work on your own mind first. So that for me, all these years of being a Buddhist, that enabled me to be working with all these prisoners and in this nightmarish, bureaucratic, ridiculous, appalling system and not lose the plot myself, you know. I mean, if I'd gone into one of those prisons to help people back in the 70s, I would have been thrown into prison myself. But now with the Buddhist approach, you learn to be skillful and wise and one-on-one. And I see the profound effect of working one person at a time, giving books, supporting people, loving them, being their friends. That's the way to help, you know. It's very powerful for my mind. It is continuing to be inspiring, you know. That's my experience, Desmond. Mm. Does someone else have any questions?
You're really dealing with people in extreme situations.
That's right. And that's why I have so much admiration, because, you know, because they can't change anything. Their backs are against the wall. That's what I'm saying. For us, who are living in relative luxury, and not to be guilty about it. Don't be guilty. Delight in your good fortune that you've got freedom and can buy food whenever you want and not getting sick. I mean, don't just feel guilty. That's why understanding karma is so powerful, because every experience we all have is the fruit of our past actions. We created our happiness, so don't waste it. But we often lack this courage to make changes. We don't like our boss. We go home every day and moan about him. Well, you could change your job. Oh no, I won't get another job. Well, you could change your mind. No, I can't do that. So we don't even know how to change our situation, and we have the luxury to do it, and we don't even know how to change our mind. So we're hopeless. We just we stay in misery. Whereas these guys in prison have got two extreme options: go mad or change your mind, baby. It's very powerful for me, very inspiring, you know. It's like a wake-up call. for all of us, because we all, Lama Zopa a lot in his letters to all these prisoners, this book is that I'm editing, put together, is all the prisoners wrote to him, more than 100, and he's written these long, long letters of advice to them. It's very powerful. And all the time he'd say, you know, your inner prison is nothing, your outer prison, and this sounds shocking to us, is nothing in comparison with the inner prison of ordinary people. The prison of attachment, the prison of anger, the prison of depression. And all my friends in prison who are practicing, they know that is true because they've changed their mind. As my friend Sunny says, I knew I had a choice. No one can take my mind from me. So she became a happy, content, fulfilled person. He gave up resentment and fear and dramas and therefore no suffering. You know, this is the point that Buddha's telling us, but it's hard to hear it. It's hard to hear it. Do you understand, Desmond? Anyone have any other questions, please?
Yeah, yes. There is a question from someone called Lisa.
Good,
and Lisa wants to know, she says, I see karma as an energetic creations that we make by our behavior and keep encountering as we live our lives. Is this a valid way to understand it, please?
It sounds very nice, Lisa, yeah, but putting it more bluntly, karma, yes, you're wrong, not wrong, darling, not wrong, but I'll give you the kind of the Buddhist presentation of it in Buddhist terminology, practical, down to earth, and see if you can link what you just said to what I'm saying here. That karma is this natural law that the Buddha says runs the universe, runs all minds, runs all lives. No one runs it. No one's made it up. It's not speculation. It's actually Buddha's observation that every millisecond of any being or person or dog or rat or human thinks or does or says, every millisecond of what we think and do and say, one, sows seeds in our mind, programs our mind, and produces our future experiences, or two, every moment of what we're experiencing now, every second, is the fruit of seeds we've planted in our mind in the past. And this, for the Buddha, is a natural law that runs the universe. That's the way of saying it. So given, next step now, given that we don't want suffering and do want happiness, the Buddha says, well, guess what, folks? If you don't want suffering, stop causing it. And what causes it? At the simplest level, don't harm others, don't kill, don't badmouth, don't lie, don't steal, don't torture, don't rape, don't harm sentient beings. Practice the virtue of refraining from harming. Eventually on the compassion wing, you also practice the virtue of actually helping others, because everything we think and do and say programs us and produces our future suffering. So our suffering is a fruit of our past negative actions, and our happiness is the fruit of our past virtuous actions. It's a very simple principle, but we hear it as punishment and reward, and it doesn't mean that at all, you know. But that's the essence of it, in practical, down-to-earth words, Lisa. Who else?
Thank you. No, another question this is from Emma.
Alan put his hand up, so Alan can come soon. Go on, Desmond.
Emma Lisa, and she says, why do things happen to me? Mindset and acceptance. Where does striving for equality, etc., sit within that kind of acceptance for?
So why things happen to me? Annalisa says that. Why do things happen to me?
Yes.
Okay, then what's interesting about that?
How that mindset compared to, you know, the fact that, you know, how much should one accept and how much should one do? Okay,
that's a really good point. So there's a lot of implications in what Annalisa says. What I'm hearing, first of all, even though she didn't say it, is why do bad things happen to me? That's first point. And second, the implication of her saying, how much will I accept and how much will I do? That's implication of that statement, Annalisa, is somehow acceptance is passive and action means resisting. Many misconceptions there, Annalisa, may I suggest? So let me just say the view. This would be the correct way to interpret Buddha's teachings at a fairly relative level, okay? Given, if I go to the doctor, and Buddha's our doctor, let's say, use the analogy, and she says, my God, Robina, you've got to stop smoking, baby, because you don't want cancer. And she will show me these cancerous lungs. She said, if you keep smoking, you're going to suffer in the future. So I'll go, oh my God, thank you for warning me. I must stop smoking now. But as soon as we hear Buddha say, if you kill Robina, you're going to get killed in the future, we go, who do you think you are, punishing me? How dare you say that? Or then I'll go, oh, I'm such a bad person. No. So understanding that suffering comes from causes that I did And understanding that happiness comes from causes that I did, and given that I do want happiness and don't want suffering, then it's a no-brainer. I will stop smoking. Therefore, I will stop killing. I will stop lying. I will stop stealing, because they are the cause of my present suffering. If people are mean to me, it's because of an action I did. If people don't believe my words, it's because of past lying. If people, harm me, it's because I've harmed them. If people don't give me a loan at the bank, it's because I've stolen. This sounds so superstitious to us because we hear it like that, but you're not superstitious when the doctor shows you these cancerous lungs and you've never heard of cancer or smoking being the cause of it, but you'll accept her wisdom and take her advice happily. Why? Because you don't want suffering. And if you do get cancer, you must have smoked. What a drag, So we learn from it, and it's a learning, it's accountability and learning. I'm sick of suffering. Then I realize every second of my happiness, and we never ask this, I've never yet had a person ask me why do good things happen, Robina? We only think of karma as bad because we're addicted to misery. But every time someone's kind to you, the fact that you have a house, a mattress to sleep on, food, not sickness, a kind person, a bank who gives you a mortgage, a husband who loves you sometimes, a child who does what does you want sometimes, every tiny good thing throughout the day that it occurs to you is the fruit, each of them, of virtuous seeds you've planted. It's very specific, but we don't hear it this way. We just think, aren't I lucky? It's good luck and bad luck. That's superstition for the Buddha. So when we own our happiness and know we caused it, then we can easily own our suffering. And we know, because also we know what caused it. It brings accountability. It's the opposite to guilt, blame, and all the rest. It's powerful if we hear it properly. Then, on the basis of this, we can have compassion for others. We realize we're all in the same boat. We're all experiencing the fruits of our past suffering, our past negative actions, and we're all experiencing the fruit of our past virtuous actions. These words are simple, but they're hard for us to process because we think of it very differently in our culture. We think of it as punishment and reward, and it's heavy for us. So I'm just saying it very bluntly. This is Buddha's teaching. It's been around for several thousand years. And this is the fundamental component. Tibetans really are into this one because they all study it in depth. Not all study, but they brought up with this view. The view that we have, that I didn't ask to get born, it's not my fault, it's good luck and bad luck, that's the view that we have as the truth. Well, the Tibetans get brought into this life mostly with this view that this is the way life is, karma, So you take responsibility. We take responsibility. It becomes accountable. So then you can help others. So when I know that my suffering is a fruit of my past actions, and I know that my happiness is the fruit of my past virtues, then of course I'll realize everybody's in the same boat. We've had countless lifetimes. We keep bumping into each other, harming one life, being harmed the next, helping one life, being helped the next. It's all, in other words, the law of botany, seeds and fruits. It refers to weeds as well as flowers. But we're addicted to karma as being punishment, and we're addicted to karma as being only the negative. They're the mistakes we make. So it needs a really fresh look, and you can only get that by studying the Buddha's teachings, and looking at it very freshly. It's a very different view. That's all I can say, Annalisa. So get out there and demonstrate. Yes. Yes.
No, here's another question, Robina. This is
okay. Won't be long. Who was it? Where was somebody? Somebody else had their hand up before. Who was it? You keep changing pictures. I can't see where you were.
Yeah, who'd like to ask a question?
Somebody here had their hand up, but now you've moved your picture. You didn't do it, I know. Some man. Who was it before? Where are you? Oh dear, I can't find him. Tell me the question, Desmond.
Yes, the question is this. It really sort of relates in a way to the things you've been talking about.
Yeah.
Do you think your earlier activism in your earlier part of your life is at odds with the Buddhist practice?
No.
Or do you think it complements?
Yeah, for me, it's like the person we are surely is the sum total of everything we've done in our lives. And at the moment in time, the Buddhist view is the one that runs my life. It's the one I relate to. It's the one I buy into. It's the one I'm studying. It's the one I'm trying to practice. But I see none of what I've done in the past as any contradiction. I'm not trying to sound like a saint, and I'm not. But I can say all my political activity was always driven by the wish to make the world a better place. My methods just changed. That's all, And of course. And that's all. So I am the part of me that was radical lefty and hippie and Catholic and and feminist. It's all integrated. It's become who I am. It's not contradictory. I haven't thrown it out. That's schizophrenic. How could I do that? But I've got a different way of presenting it all now. Of course it's made me the person I am. How could it not be? Of course it has. And it's integrated. There's no conflict in me about any of it. Of course not. Of course not. Does that make sense, people? It's informed. It's helped me
It
understand the world.
definitely does.
I mean, it's, I understand, you know, give me a bit of kind of help me understand. Because if you don't know your own mind well and your own suffering, you can't help others, can you? You know, this is the thing. So I can really see that. I understand crazy mind. I understand delusions. I've got them all. Got the lot, you know. So I understand other people. I understand what causes them suffering too, because I'm the same. No question. What else, people?
Yeah, Claire.
It was Alan. This was Alan. Here he is at the top. On my picture, he's
Alan
next
there?
to you, Desmond. So you talk to me, Alan. Unmute yourself, honey, and talk to me. Yes, yes.
Yes. Just your talk about prisons brings up the story of Nelson Mandela.
Yes.
And how he, as a black man,
yes,
was forced into a corner where nothing would change that apartheid system. And eventually he was put into prison. He was so angry, and this went on for years. And then he suddenly thought, why am I angry? That's helping nothing.
There
it's
you
not
go.
helping my cause.
I said.
And at the end of it, it was he that the prison guards used to all their children to.
That's right, exactly.
Extra lessons in English,
exactly.
Afrikaans,
There you go.
math, geography. He knew it all.
No, he's a profound example. That's exactly right. And that's the revelation that if we can have that, and that means, doesn't it, Alan, we have to understand how anger, but we've got to be, how anger, if it destroys us, what's the point? This is the whole thing. Yeah. And I always remember Martin Luther King. I mean, when I was an old radical lefty, I liked Malcolm X, and I still do love Malcolm X. He was an amazing human being because he went through a transformation as well. But I remember Martin Luther King saying, you know, and we can see what an incredible activist he was. He was clearly a patient man. You could tell by his nature he was not an angry guy. But look at the courage he had. He never stopped demonstrating. He risked his life. He never stopped. And he said, it's good to see there are faults in the world. It's good to see there's the racism, there's the suffering. But then you say, what can I do to help? And that's compassion, Alan. And that's what you can see with any of these human beings. That we assume in our culture, fairly grossly, I think, that if you don't have anger, you don't care. Because it's too extreme. But, you know, as Holiness one time said, because we can see he's got no anger. He's hilarious. He's clearly a patient man. But look how dynamic he is. This is the point. Same with Mandela. Same with Martin Luther King. Dynamic human beings, but not raging, angry. Meaning, so anger here, just remember the Buddhist view. Anger is, I'll tell you what Dalai Lama said. But anger is not just, oh my God, look at the fault. That's good to see this. That's criticism. There is fault. There is suffering. But anger is, then you look for who caused it, and you want to destroy. That's when anger is destructive in our own lives and in politics. I'm not being kind of goody-goody here. I've never lost my speedy, crazy energy. Look at me. I'm like a maniac. Listen to me. Many people accuse me of being so angry. And what can I do? But I can tell you, my mind is radically changed from how it used to be. But anger is like a philosophy. Anger says, look at that suffering there. Whom can we blame and whom can we destroy? That's what it's a really powerful idea, and that can only bring destruction. So as His Holiness said, this journalist said, but anger looks like it's very productive. And he said, Dalai Lama said, I know what you mean, but if it's only anger, which is the wish to harm, then it won't last and it'll destroy. But if it's compassion, you won't give up. And that's the thing with Mandela. That's the thing with the Dalai Lama. That's the thing with Martin Luther King. They never gave up. This courage that says, I must keep doing it, you know. And that's what's interesting about the Tibetans. I'm not trying to make them all saints, because they're not. They're like humans like the rest of us. But I remember a friend of mine, Jigdrol, years ago, was a monk. Back it was one of the, you know, in 87, I think, it was like this first mini uprising, wasn't it? Against the Chinese communists, and it was all the young monks and nuns who were the radicals. They're the ones demonstrating. So when we see demonstrators, we think of anger in the way we interpret it, you know. But my friend Jigdrol was he was arrested, then he was tortured, got out of prison again. He was then demonstrating again, and his friend had his head blown off. He thought he'd better escape this time, so he came to Nepal. This is like 30 years ago, and he was telling me all this story, and he was in tears. And I said to him casually, I said, Jigdrol, do you ever get angry? And he laughed casually and said, angry, Robina, what for? It's our own fault. Now, this is shocking for our ears, isn't it? But he just meant karma. He didn't give some long philosophical explanation. He meant, in other words, if you have the view of karma, and this is quite profound for us in our culture, if you've really internalized it, you know why something is going on, but you think of us when we say anger. You think of when you're angry. What's the philosophy of anger? Listen to anger. How dare you do that to me? I don't deserve it. Think about that. That's quite profound. And that's why we go mad. That's why we go completely out of our brain, because we can't see why this bad thing is happening. That's anger, and it can be there mixed with compassion if you like, but in the end it's just completely self-defeating and destructive. He did not have that. He didn't need to. He knew why it's happening. They call it karma, but meanwhile he's out there demonstrating, risking his life. So there's no contradiction between not being angry but political activity. It's come from compassion because it's the right thing to do. It's very powerful for me. That was very powerful, you know. Or even more dramatic, I remember years ago in 2003, when I was doing the prison project in San Francisco, and Richard Gere invited the Dalai Lama, His Holiness, to New York, and he invited 20 former prisoners, all of whom had done some kind of meditation in prison, and some people like me as well, who were working with people in prison. It was very moving, a whole cross-section of Americans, you know, black, white, Puerto Rican, Mexican, male, female, all have some kind of suffering in prison, doing some kind of meditation, whatever. It was a wonderful day. They talked, they had a meeting with His Holiness. It was very moving. He also invited 2 young Tibetan nuns, these nice girls, you know, 21, they wouldn't hurt a fly, imprisoned, tortured and sexually abused. What for? For being a Buddhist, right? Whatever. So there they were telling their experiences, these young women. So I imagine if you wanted to quantify suffering, most of those Americans would probably argue that their suffering was worse than everybody else's. But what was evident to the Americans was there was no anger in these women's mind. It's hard for us to hear that. And remember, what does anger say? How dare that happen? Why is that happening? Either to the people out there, or why is it happening to me? We go mad because we don't have an explanation in the materialist world. That's a simple fact. It's a philosophy we have. So that's why we suffer so terribly. We don't know why bad things happen. We go mad. So they didn't have that view. They weren't angry. So there were tears. They were sad. And as one said very quietly at the end, of course, we had compassion for our torturers because we knew we must have harmed them in the past, you know. And this is the real point, because we knew they would suffer in the future. And in a way, that's the basis of real compassion. That Buddha's saying our heart should break for the crazy world, for the maniacs, for the harmers, for the torturers, for the sufferers, because look at out of their rage, their despair, their anger, they're being harmed now because of their past actions, and they're harming now others and will continue to suffer. I mean, it's a heavy view for us, but it's not punitive. It should be the basis of incredible compassion, because everybody's in the same boat. We're all harming each other. And when we have compassion for ourselves first, in the wisdom wing, then we can afford to have compassion for others and not lose the plot, you know. These young women had compassion for their torturers. I mean, that sounds insane to us, you know. So it needs some thinking about. It was a long answer, Alan, I'm sorry. But it was a wonderful thing you started off. It's very powerful what you said. It's so true, isn't it, with him? It's amazing. So it's nearly time to go, but we're not desperate. We can have a bit more questions. If
yeah, there are quite a few more questions. Are there any from the floor? Are there any from the floor?
Yeah, you can leave if you have to. I'm very happy, but I'm happy to continue. Go on.
Well, Gary is asking, do you think psychedelic therapy can play a part in Buddhism?
Well, you know, in my own experience, Gary, being an old hippie, I was into a bit of, you know, I wasn't very extreme, but I was certainly, well, I mean, I smoked cigarettes. That can't help much. And I smoked masses of cigarettes. At the same time, I remember I smoked up to 80 Marlboros a day when I was really extreme because I was on acid. No, sorry, not acid. I didn't like acid much. Speed. Speed was my drug of choice. I mean, you wouldn't think I needed more speed, but I did. Plenty of speed. So I was a maniac, smoking marijuana in between my 80 Marlboros, and I'm not joking, and in between my speed. So somehow, you know, then I'd have a few trips sometimes. I had lots of marijuana, and occasionally I'd have acid. So I can definitely say this. It was a major part of my own progression where it helped me get past the usual narrow way of seeing things and open my mind. But to say it's an actual technique and a method, no, completely make you crazy in the end, no. But it can be a catalyst. Lots of things can be catalysts, but it doesn't follow. Put it this way, it happened to me, for me, it became a catalyst for me to see my mind in a different way. But in the end, I gave it all up because, I mean, it's not going to help. And in the long term, for the Buddhist view, our mind, when we learn to do meditation, I mean serious shamatha, not just sitting mindful for 5 minutes, but serious concentration technique. When you describe in the text the potential that our mind has got This is beyond mind-boggling. You can't imagine the power of the mind that we've all got that we never even access. And this is in the Buddha's teachings. It explains how we've got this incredible potential for incredible clarity and bliss and brilliance and qualities. It's astonishing. So drugs could be a catalyst. Doesn't follow that it would be, but in the end, not a necessary tool, because it's a very gross level. It's only physical. We've got to get to the more subtle level of our mind, which doesn't need physical. That's my answer, Gary. Who else? Desmond?
Yeah, there's a question from Jakara, and
Yes.
she asked, as a teacher, how do you work around people that don't want to help themselves?
Oh, you just give them a hug and love them. What else can you do? You can bring a horse to water, you can't make it drink. That's clear. And that's very much from the Buddhist perspective, isn't it? You can only help a person who, I mean, you don't go around shoving, you don't go around demanding people change their minds. I mean, the worst thing possible in Buddhism is to give advice to somebody who's not asked. So this is why my friend's in prison, and this is a really interesting point, by the way. I remember the only one prison ever where I was invited to come by the psychiatrist in a sex offenders unit in Melbourne. Normally, I'd be invited by the chaplain because the prisoner had come and said, we want that Buddhist teacher, or the prisoners themselves would invite. And then they put a poster up, and then those who wanted to come would come. So they were always there by choice. But this one prison ever, the moment I walked into the room, these guys sitting there, I knew that they had not wanted to come. They were told to come. I didn't open my mouth. I talked about the football and the weather, and I left, because I would not talk to anybody if they don't want to hear what I have to say. And we know as Buddhists, it's not because it's some holy thing you don't try to convert a person. It's because it's just not, you can bring a horse to water, you can't make them drink. So if anybody just want to help themselves, I'm not going to help them. I love them. Give them love, yes. Give them a hug. Tell them they're a nice person, but not give them advice. No way. Otherwise, we beat our head against brick walls, and we often do that. And I'd just make a suggestion here. That, for me, is very much part of our faulty compassion when it comes to our beloveds. We see their problems, but we don't realise we haven't done enough of the wisdom work yet. We haven't done enough of working on our own attachment. And our attachment is this demented part of us that wants everything to be the way I want it. But we couch it in nice, compassionate terms. We put a nice, compassionate gloss on it, but actually it's our own neurosis bullying our brother to stop being an alcoholic, and then we get mad at him because he doesn't go to AA. I mean, he didn't ask us to help him. Mind our own damn business, So if a person doesn't want your help, you can still love them, be aware of them, give them love, praise them, but don't give them advice. They haven't asked for it. So you've got to have that wisdom, otherwise we'll get very ridiculous. What else?
Very good point. Yeah, Anthony asks, what book on Buddhism do prisoners particularly respond to? And what book do they keep returning to? What title?
Oh, so many. There are so many. I mean, we really have in the prison project, which I don't run anymore, but we have a vast library of books. We didn't try to stint on books. That's the one gift we can give people, and that's they're so precious to them because they have nothing. So, but I know when prisoners first write to us, we would send a little book, and some of these little free books of Lama Yeshe, very simple talk by Lama Yeshe, he's my first teacher, and he always somehow he met Westerners in the late 60s, and he just somehow, feels to me, he was almost like born a hippie. He just knew how to talk to Westerners. It was very extraordinary. His language was very uplifting, very sweet, very psychological. So I say the number of prisoners. I mean, one of my friends, a Puerto Rican, said, Robina, my copy of Lama Yeshe is worn thin. Often that's a first book we send, and because he always talked in an uplifting way about our potential as human beings. And people, we love to hear that, because we don't tell ourselves we've got potential. Everybody else tells us we're horrible. So to read someone who says you've got this wonderful mind and you've got potential is very uplifting. But it depends on the student. I mean, many of our guys in prison are serious students of some of our 7-year master's program, philosophical studies. Others just like simple books. Others just want, everyone's very different. But uplifting at the beginning, very much that, hearing that you've got potential. That's not how we tend to think in our culture,
I'm sure that's absolutely true.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, there's not one from Mazen here. And what do you, and this is a sort of a question which I'm sure is asked a lot. What do you do when we notice part of our reason for practicing is wanting to improve our samsaric existence? I assume it means it's being rather selfish.
Well, you mean, first two things, I think. I thought you were about to say wanting to improve yourself as a person. Do not ever think that's bad. That's necessary. But you say your samsaric existence. That means if you're doing your practice so you can get more rich and have more boyfriends, then then you're not going to. It won't bring the result anyway. It's self-defeating. It won't help. That's all. Because when we understand attachment, which we don't, when we begin to, it's the junkie mind. And so if you want to just keep doing something to help you become more of a junkie, it's not going to help you much. So, but to help you want to become a better human being, there's nothing wrong with that. That's fantastic, because then you're qualified to help others. So don't ever doubt that aspect. But if you really mean you practice because you want to get richer and more famous and have more money and more sex, then you're not going to get it anyway. You'll still be miserable, so it won't work. It just won't work. It's self-defeating. That's my answer.
And this one is from Elena. Do wisdom and compassion grow together, or does one precede the other?
That's a really interesting point. You could say there are really specific practices that are focused on the wisdom wing, which is the first stages of practice. You control your body and speech. You begin to work on your mind. And the energy behind that is to protect you from hurting yourself more, protect you from more suffering. You are the beneficiary. But naturally and inevitably, as I work on controlling my speech, as I work on stopping bad-mouthing my husband, as I work on controlling my anger, guess what? My husband will benefit. So the indirect result of the wisdom wing is that people are benefited. And then there are practices that you do specifically to benefit others. And inevitably, you are the beneficiary of those as well. So it's both. They feed each other, but there are specific techniques. I remember when I first went to my first teachings from Lama Zopa Lama Yeshe, and it was like all the teachings, especially about bodhicitta, this whole outrageous idea of being a bodhisattva from life to life to life, never giving up helping others. It just seemed like insane, like over the top, too big for me. I couldn't handle it, I couldn't get a leg up into it. It just seemed too much. So I remember then I heard His Holiness say, if you want to help others, practice compassion. If you want to help yourself, practice compassion. That's powerful. So every time you practice compassion, you can't help but benefit yourself. And don't be ashamed about that. And every time you practice controlling your body and speech, you're the beneficiary. But as Lama Zopa says, all the rats and roaches will have a party. Could you leave them in peace? So the wisdom ring is you direct beneficiary, but others can't help but benefit because you're a nicer person to be around. And the compassion wing is directly to help others, but you'll also be the beneficiary. So they help each other. No question. No doubt. Very integrated.
Question from Stephen here. Does no killing also refer to animals, and does that mean you've got to be a vegetarian?
I mean, it certainly gets a long time. It's now 6 minutes past the hour, so we could speak about this for another 2 hours, actually, but let me keep it simple. There's a bit of a minefield among people, isn't it, this one? It's way more nuanced than we think. So for me, the best way to look at it, the biggest way, is to rephrase the question. What is the karma I create by using animals' flesh for my own well-being? And that doesn't, see, eating is just one of those. Eating, and because my sense is because we're so attached to eating food, we're very obsessed about the action of eating. But what about the leather belts? What about the silk we're using? What about what about eating vegetarian food? Vegetarians and vegans get very upset with this, but please listen. The Buddha's view is there are billions and trillions of sentient beings on this planet, and just by existing, we are slaughtering each other. This is a fact. So what are you going to do with that? Then the Buddhist approach is you do as much as you can to minimize the harm you do to others. That's the bottom line. That's the bottom line. So I always remember one time when I was in Liverpool, and I put on my Facebook page, often I didn't look at the page, I'd send my pictures to my person who did it, and I put a picture of me in Liverpool in this wonderful cheese shop, and I was buying this kick-ass cheddar. And I remember some fundamentalist, I have to be precise here, vegan, two of them got extremely upset. How dare a Buddhist nun eat cheese, whatever. So, I mean, every one of us has to live the way we live. I think we've got to mind our own business and not give lectures to people unless they ask, like I'm saying. But I mean, so I didn't want to be political. So I remember thinking, I'd always wondered how many creatures got slaughtered on the road, the bugs, So sure enough, you Google it, someone's done the research. So there's some Dutch guy, I forget the proper details, it was like per kilometre, just on the number plate, trillions and trillions of little bugs get squashed and slaughtered every day. Now, for the Buddha, excuse me, they're sentient beings. They want to be happy, they don't want to suffer. But we don't eat them, so we don't care. Now, even more than that, I remember, I always tell these stories. these two. I remember this Australian scientist was talking about, you know, he got upset with all the fundamentalists. I'm discussing not vegans and vegetarians, because I mean, you know, we're all got our own business and do our own business and do what we can to not harm others. But the ones who are putting it down everybody else's throat. And I'm not saying we shouldn't politicize. I'm not saying we shouldn't try and change the world, because the meat industry is evil. It's destroying the planet. There's no question. But when you look at the big picture, it's way more than that. So this, he quoted this wheat field, and this must be the same all over the world, where when the wheat is what for? You grow wheat, 20% for the meat, probably for the bulls or whatever, maybe 80% or 60% for the vegans and vegetarians. But he pointed out that in the off-season, when this wheat field was overrun by these cute little field mice. There were millions of them. He had photos of them. He said they sing love songs to each other, so cute. And of course, what do you do when you have to grow the wheat? You slaughter the field mice, and you don't do it gently. But there's one of these guys on this Facebook page said, oh, but you can't help that, he said. So in other words, we're so obsessed with eating, we only think it matters if you eat the flesh. But we don't mind those millions of field mice who are slaughtered for the vegans and vegetarians. We kind of dismiss it. So we've got to look, I think, a bit bigger. It's a bigger issue than merely whether you eat meat or not. It's a lot more nuanced than that, is my broader point. So then that's some food for thought for you. Any more questions?
Yes. This is from Helen. And she says, going back to karma, do you make bad karma through actions that at the time you did not know or believe were wrong? But now in the present moment, you believe they are wrong, and you can't undo it.
That's right. It's a very good point. Thank you so much, Helen. I'll just answer briefly. If karma is a natural law, which Buddha is saying that it is, in other words, it's not coming from God. It's not coming from Buddha. He's not mandating it. He didn't create a law, and then he judges and punishes and rewards. It's a natural law like botany. It's a natural law like if you put your finger in the fire, it's a natural law, given the way the universe is, that it will burn you, whether you know it or not. And that's the point about karma. Now, because we hear it as punishment and reward, that sounds very heavy to us. It sounds like it's not fair. But the fact is, this is the point when we start to understand karma as a Buddhist, you realize that out of ignorance, I've done so many things that have harmed me. I've harmed others, and therefore that'll bring consequences to me. It's like I didn't know when I smoked cigarettes. I'd never heard of lung cancer. It's a simple analogy in ordinary world. I didn't know that smoking 80 Marlboros a day could give me lung cancer. Luckily, I didn't get it. I was ignorant. So I look back on it, I go, wow, my God, I was such a fool. I was risking my life, you know. I didn't know. So because I didn't know that smoking could cause lung cancer, that does not mean I won't get lung cancer. That's the dualistic view we have about punishment and reward. Sort of like we go to the doctor, well, I didn't know it was going to harm me, doctor. Can you please get me off the hook? It's not her job, you know. There's no punishment and reward. So this is the thing. It's a natural law that generosity will bring good things for you, whether you knew it or not. So aren't you fortunate? So stealing also will bring its own results, even if you don't think it has consequences. And that's part of the process. We have a practice among Tibetans, we call it the purification. We do it at the end of the day. Remember, Lama Zopa said we're insane not to do it every day. And it's a very practical psychological approach that's kind of, they call it, these four powers: regret, reliance, the remedy, and resolve. And it's a very practical psychology, because if karma is everything you do in your mind, changes your mind. So first, regret is like acknowledging, I did these dumb things out of my ignorance. I didn't know, you know. Had a baby when I was 20, I had abortion when I was 23. I did it then. I didn't think of it as a human being. I just didn't want a baby, that's all. And I look back on that action. It was a real human being I killed. So I regret having done that. But the crucial point is this: regret isn't guilt. Regret is going, I didn't know, out of my ignorance, I did that action, and I deeply regret that, because I don't want the future results, because everything you think and do and say sows seeds. So of course I don't want suffering. So I regret it for my own sake, out of compassion, because of my ignorance. Then I think of compassion. I'm just keeping it simple. The second step is where you have compassion for those you've harmed. So then I have compassion for that sentient being who came running into my womb at conception. And then the third one, we do a practice to purify. We say a certain mantra, we visualize. It's all your mind doing it sincerely. And the fourth one is resolve. I will never kill again. So there's no karma we can't change. There's no karma we can't take responsibility for, out of kindness to ourselves and out of compassion to others, and then make a decision to change. It's a very powerful psychological process to go through. It's like you're being your own best friend. And it's not judgment, it's not reward, it's not punitive, it's not blame. We hear it this way, but it's not. It's very practical. Hope that helped.
Robina, you've given a wonderful talk. Yeah, I think there's time only for one more question.
Okay, good.
But you know, on this list there are 20 more questions here.
Oh no, I'm so sorry.
Yes. So I think we can only do one. But I tell you what the question is. Would you recommend a daily practice we should all do? Something very simple.
Well, you know, the bottom line, to get the essence of wisdom and compassion, the bottom line is to do some kind of practical technique, even for 5 minutes, to settle down and attempt to focus your mind. That's all so-called mindfulness is. You're attempting to not follow every ridiculous thought. You're attempting to have the courage just to simply pay attention and start with your breath. The aim is not to have a vision. The aim is not to make all the thoughts go away. The aim is not to relax. The aim is just to develop the ability to focus your attention. And then in your daily, and that's a 5 minutes. And you make a little motivation. Let me make the most of today, try and control my body and speech and not harm too many people. And let me have as much awareness of what the hell is going on in my mind before it vomits out my mouth and harm others. And if you do that throughout the day, try and control your body and speech. Or the essence of it is say in the Bodhisattva path, they say, when you're with others, you control your body and speech because that's what impacts. So that's for their sake. And when you're on your own, watch your mind. So we did this, we're doing the wisdom and the compassion wing. So for your own sake, attempt to use that skill in the morning throughout the day to see what's happening in your mind and own what's there and try and control your body and speech and not harm others. Bare minimum, I'd say that. And that's the essence of all Buddha's advice. And we just keep getting better at that. That's what I'd recommend.
Well, Robina, that was a great talk, a great evening with you. Thank you very much. I hope you can come back again and give us another talk.
Delighted. Can I sing Can I sing a couple of little prayers to finish?
Yes, please.
All right. So there's 2 little baby prayers. I think of it as sort of the first one we did was like one bookend, and this is the other bookend. So it's a motivation, and we call this one a dedication. So we're just thinking very casually, you know, that I'm going to sing these prayers in Tibetan. That what we've done is this 1.5 hours, 1 3/4 hours, as many moments as there have been, is as many seeds we've planted. Nothing goes astray. That's a fundamental point in Buddhism. Nothing goes astray. We don't remember it all, but it's all stored away in there. So we think maybe nourish these seeds from this moment forward, with each of us with our own practice, whatever it might be, never giving up on our own amazing potential, so that we can help others, both wings, okay? And the second little prayer, just making this amazing aspiration of wanting to benefit others. May it never cease, and may it grow and grow in the hearts of all. Okay. Gewadi Nyududag Lama Sangye Drugyurne Drowa Chikyang Malupa Dei Sala Gopashok Jangchob Semchog Rinpoche Makie Panam Kegyochig Kie Panyampa Me Payang Gongne Gongdu Pava Shok. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Londoners and whoever you are, wherever you're from. Much love, everybody. Never give up. Keep a happy mind. Be enthusiastic. Dalai Lama says we should think in terms of eons, okay? Might as well. Thank you, people, so much.
Bye.
I rejoice in the Buddhist Society and all the wonderful work all these years. You keep going, okay?